The endgame in Diablo 4 is a bit of a mess right now. And before you type away, I just want to make it clear that I very, very much enjoy this game. It has been a complete breath of fresh air. For a game to have been out a week and to have this much polish and content, it is a phenomenal achievement. Kudos to Blizzard for that. But I want to talk today as someone that plays a lot of these games and plays really up to the high end of the content. I want to give my opinion on, the problems with the endgame systems. These are problems that people might not have encountered yet. Normally, people in my situation where you're like, well, yeah, you've played too much. You will run into these same things that I've run into once you get to this point, or maybe you've already done so, and maybe you share my opinion. We're going to primarily talk about Nightmare. What we've seen over the past few weeks is a constant nerf to regular dungeons. Regular dungeons have been the best way to farm up gear, experience, whether it's as a group or a solo player. Resetting the same dungeon over and over again and running it for both experience and rewards has been the best way to play the game. Which, I can't be the only one that thinks that's really frustrating and quite boring, because you level up this insane character, you get all your gear, you get your unique items, you get your best in slot aspects, you put them on your gear, and then you realize you're just doing normal content. There's no reason to push the difficulty outside of maybe challenging Uber Lilith, or for the sake of completionism, to get your character to be as good as it can be, to kill more monsters in normal dungeons. You can see the problem here, right? It seems like the developers are trying to force you not to run normal mode dungeons instead of incentivizing you to run nightmare dungeons. And there seems to be quite an easy solution here. One of the main reasons normal mode dungeons are competitive with nightmare dungeons, despite nightmare dungeons having these affixes, having glyph XP, having higher tier monsters, you having some control over the tier of the monster, is that the loot doesn't scale in any way whatsoever. There is zero reason right now, if you want loot, to farm these over a normal dungeon. You are as likely to find an 820 item level item in a normal mode dungeon as you are a nightmare dungeon. That alone should ring some bells, surely. If you are going to push the content higher and higher, the rewards should compensate in some way. You should be in some ways rewarded, whether it's for XP or loot, by doing this harder content, and it just doesn't feel like that's in the game right now. Now, this could just be down to the game being new and the endgame systems are underdeveloped, or they've held something in the chamber ready for season 1, which my fingers are very much crossed for, and I think Blizzard will address this. But I really did want to give my 2 cents on this, because I think the current systems in the endgame need a bit of love. I really want Nightmare Dungeons to be good, but in the current state, they just aren't. Because not only is it the loot, we'll come on to point number 2, and it's that you have to run back and forth for each of them. If you were to buy 50 sigils from the vendor, likelihood is you're going to get a few duplicates. You're not going to know which are the best ones unless you've got someone else's tier list, which I'm working on, by the way. But you're not going to know which ones are the best ones to run, and then at that point you have to start looking it up. Maybe you just bounce between dungeon to dungeon and you end up wasting 3 minutes between each, going to town, to vendor, to run back to the dungeon. It's really frustrating. There's a reason people, despite normal mode dungeons being as arguably boring as they are, there's a reason people are doing them, and it's because you can just reset them and you don't have to waste your time galloping between town and the dungeon to run it. And then obviously as you get more clear speed, guess what? More time percentage-wise is spent running between town because you're killing all the mobs in the dungeon faster. So you end up spending a bigger portion of your time running between dungeons because that doesn't scale. You can kill the mobs faster, you ain't running to a dungeon faster. So that is immediately more annoying. And the big thing, the kicker, number 3, and some people are going to be really pissed off that I'm showing this, and maybe you think I've been abusing it, but there's a reason I have the Magic Find sigil right here, and it is to emphasize the point that right now there is an exploit in the game that allows players to reset Nightmare Dungeons, and you can permanently run a Magic Find dungeon. How I found this is I went to Reddit and there was this post. I saw some people doing this on Twitch. I think it's perfectly fine. Blizzard seems to be having a pretty relaxed approach to bugs. This seems like a part of the game where they're trying to figure things out, get on top of things. So I don't blame anyone for doing this. This, honestly, with how Nightmare Dungeons probably currently are, I wouldn't blame anyone for doing this. If you want to do Nightmare Dungeons, go ahead, do this, whatever. But there is currently a way, by implementing a series of steps, to infinitely reset a Nightmare Dungeon for XP and loot. This person, the commenter, I imagine didn't understand the implication of being able to reset the same one if you had a Magic Find dungeon. So what you could ultimately do is run the same dungeon over again, and then, and only then, if you exploit this, are Nightmare Dungeons worth running. So, this may have seemed like a bit of a down video, but honestly, I love Diablo 4 so far. I think it's a fantastic game, and I'm really excited for the future of the game, but I want something to be done about Nightmare Dungeons, and I really hope it is done in the future. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.